This is Sirens, a series brought to you by the Ladies of Bombshell, where we dissect the institutions of American power. Join us as we sound the alarm on tech, governance, and national security issues, and generally, when we have the time, lure some men to their deaths. I'm Lauren DeYoung-Shulman.
I'm Rada Iyengar-Plum.
So we're going to talk about surveys about the federal government in just a minute. So this led me to the question of, if you had the chance to ask every federal employee a survey question and they had to answer it honestly, what question would you ask?
So I went like two wildly different directions on this, and I will tell them to you both. The first question I would ask is, what is your favorite book of fiction?
Okay.
I feel like this would give us great insight into the federal services, and we could really categorize who's working where. And I feel like a lot could be learned from that.
Yep.
The second question I thought of was, what is the thing that you most wish to eliminate from your job?
Oh, that's a great one. Mm-hmm.
And that is a more substantive one where I feel like we could probably do a lot more for our federal workers by taking some of the really high friction things in their job and getting rid of it.
Yep.
Then you could prioritize like digital services.
Those are amazing questions. I love both of them. I just added a second because you did. So my first question is, what is the most bizarre place that you have taken a conference call? For me, that answer is a bubble bath.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
I think mine is the Natural History Museum.
Well, that's a good one. I was taking a lovely bubble bath over like the Christmas holidays at one point in time when we were dealing with like a variety of embassy security issues. And just like it was one of those like, you must get on the phone right now, Ms. Shulman. Like, okay. So I did. I mean, there wasn't really like a good way to like be like, okay, I'm going to transition here. So I just took it from there.
Yeah, fair.
Okay. My other question is, what is your stress snack that I would ask people? And stress snack could be like, what is the snack that you can access most reliably? It's like, it's usually like a vending machine. I know you would have Pop-Tarts.
I would indeed.
So for me, it was typically either also Pop-Tarts or Mrs. What's the cookies? Mrs. something cookies?
Mrs. Fields chocolate chip.
Mrs. Fields cookie. Because like those had the most like reliable, significant number of calories that you could put in your body all at one time.
Yeah.
And I feel like it's likewise. I feel like both of these would tell us a lot about the federal government. The reason that this is relevant will come up in a minute, because for It's a Drill this week, first I'm going to talk about federal retirement. Then later on, I'll talk about surveys. So for It's a Drill this week, I would like you all who are listening to picture a really large cave that is combined with that scene at the end of Indiana Jones, either Raiders of the Lost Ark or The Last Crusade, where there's like the big kind of warehouse where they're putting a bunch of papers. And I want you to imagine that as the place where they're storing all of your retirement papers if you work for the federal government, because that is actually true up in Boyers, Pennsylvania. Because for 65 years, the federal retirement process ran through a limestone mine in Boyers, Pennsylvania, God bless them all, that has several hundred people who work there, that has several million pages that are inside the mine, with runners who are hauling big manila envelopes of your retirement papers around on a golf cart.
Sure.
And like, I swear to God, this is how it worked for a long period of time. If you get the chance to visit, you totally should. July was technically, but not quite exactly, and I'll explain this in a minute, the last day of paper, where new claims come in through an online-only system, not through paper, and agencies have to transfer all of the paperwork that they're doing for you into various ways through OPM in order to determine what your retirement benefits are going to be. So this was a thing that started any number of administrations ago, but really started under the Biden administration. The Trump administration picked this up. They did actually truly a fantastic job in getting Congress to actually supply the money, to running the pilot with a couple of agencies to be able to do this, to actually taking it government-wide, which the Trump administration did last year or so, where you now have an online application that pre-fills what OPM already knows about you for retirement, at least hopefully, lets you upload your own retirement documents, estimates what your annuity is going to be in that moment, which sounds like obviously they should, but trust me, that used to take months, if not years. And it's handled over 150K claims in this first year or so. And the backlog for retirement has gone down significantly. So this is a big deal because it used to be that, first of all, filing for retirement took forever to be able to get all the papers you needed on paper through the various agencies who've worked to it to the mine. And then second, to be able to actually get the estimate of what the federal government is going to pay you could take months. So you could leave the federal government with no pay and have several months go by where they weren't paying you at all.
Huh.
So this is now sped up considerably. It is not perfect yet. That, like, actually, ironically, the month where they said we are now at the last day of paper, the timeline for all of this like doubled at that point in time. I'm going to assume that that is a transition cost that occurred. But like, this is a huge upgrade to how we have normally handled federal retirements. Now, we have not yet done the online digitization of everything that's in the mine. We'll see how long that will take. But I was incredibly excited about this. And like, I actually feel like this is a great upgrade for the federal government if we can actually like do the real work that is making sure that it's sustainable and reliable and getting people their money faster.
What are they going to do with the mine?
I don't know. I mean, like, I think they have to keep the mine. Like digitizing all of the mine will take a while. And honestly, the mine, like, we should just have that as part of lore.
That's what I'm thinking. Like, I just feel like there's a whole fun, separate set of questions we can ask people on what would you do with this mine once the records are digitized?
Did you ever get to go to either Mount Weather or Raven Rock?
Yes.
That should be a future episode that we do.
Yeah, we should indeed. I've also been inside a silver mine in Norway.
Oh my God.
Yeah, I'm a mine adventurer.
Totally. Okay, well, future episode on mines. All right, let's talk about why Secretary of War Pete Hegseth hates women.
Yeah, well, I don't know if you know this, but the Pentagon's going to start screening everyone over 30 for low T because we only want a high T military. And now we're going to have opt-in testosterone replacement therapy for anyone flagged. If you haven't done so, you should just watch the Pete Hegseth video on this.
Mhm.
And then you should think in your head, is this Pete Hegseth or is this Colin Jost and a Saturday night like cold open? It's a very like surreal experience to watch it. This is very much pulled from the manosphere, and doctors are, I will call it perplexed
Uh-huh.
because TRT is not really a performance enhancing drugs.
No.
Guidelines say don't screen routinely, and actually giving testosterone replacement therapy to men who don't really need it can actually tank their own fertility. So it's not great. Add to that, last week, Rear Admiral Amy, and I'm going to get her name wrong, Bauschensmith, who was the first woman to command a nuclear aircraft carrier, got knocked off a board list for her second star. No explanation. And for the first time in more than a decade, there are now no active duty female officers being promoted to flag.
Oh, wow.
A side note, unclear if this is legal.
That's crazy.
Yeah. There's a solid New York Times story covering kind of this and the trajectory, but it is surprising given that the Navy had already certified her as qualified to see her removal without any justification. The takeaway I would give you here is if you were thinking about returning the Pentagon to merit only, and you don't think successfully commanding a nuclear carrier counts as merit, and we want to eliminate all the qualified people able to make flag officer in the Navy who happen to be female, then we're really not looking for the most qualified people. We're looking for the most testosterone people, and the testosterone could be synthetic. So unclear to me how this is going to help us with lethality or force readiness, but I look forward to the follow-up questions.
You know, I really genuinely look forward to when all of the Navy corpsmen have to go tell everybody, like, hey guys, it's time for your annual testosterone testing. Like, this is going to be great for everybody that has to do this. It's going to be amazing. I'm sure we'll do this incredibly well, particularly given this is the organization that is now going crazy over how it handled COVID vaccines. Well, a good way to ask the Department of Defense how it feels about such things would have been the Federal Employee Viewpoint Survey. However, the Federal Employee Viewpoint Survey, we should talked about it in this podcast before. It has for about 2 decades been a survey that measures government-wide if federal employees like their jobs and their leadership and feel effective and would recommend it to others. OPM, there's lots of problems with this survey, just TLDR up front. OPM has now recently proposed a rule to say we will not centrally run this government-wide, and instead we want to hand it to agencies. This is not crazy, but I'll talk about some of the challenges you might anticipate with this. Because right now we have a central government-wide survey where they ask everybody all of these questions. You get good comparators to be able to see like where are agencies in crisis, where are agencies who have amazing leadership are doing well. And within that, you're able to drill down on various factors, particularly among different demographic areas, different kinds of skill sets, different sorts of age levels. Whereas an agency where you may have a significant like retention problem, to now where agencies can like just ask their own questions, except for like a limited number that every agency has to ask together. The ones that are getting rewritten are interesting to me. They are about morale and workload. And the ones that are getting added ask whether managers are setting clear expectations and whether work is getting done efficiently, which are not necessarily bad questions. But the fact that they got rid of those first two is interesting. One of the reasons that people have been pushing for this sort of action for a long time is that, well, we had this centrally managed survey and you could do great comparisons across agencies. It just took freaking forever to be able to get the results. And as a consequence, one of the biggest negative results on the FEVS was people believing that it would actually generate change, which was part of it took so long to be able to get the results. People were like, why even bother with this? So this is a pending rule. If you would like to comment on it and offer your own views about what you would ask about the federal employees, whether it be about their favorite stress snack or whether they've taken a conference call or anything else, you may comment on regulations.gov for OPM 2026-0368 because they're putting out a lot of regulations these days.
Wow. I feel like we should just get to rewrite the questions with our own questions if we're going to rewrite these things then.
We might as well throw it in.
I mean, just saying. My last one for It's a Drill is on export controls, which you may be familiar with as a thing we do to other countries like China. And now China is doing it to us.
Oh.
So the FT reported last week about China's Commerce Ministry looking at putting export controls on its own companies, limiting what AI they have that they let leave the country. So these are open source models that big chunks of the world developers are already building on. And the interesting part here is that this is basically looks like what the US was doing in the last administration: export lists, license reviews, checks on who the end users are. What makes it interesting is we have just spent the last year and a half with Trump going in the opposite direction, letting NVIDIA sell its chips back to China, loosening up export controls. You may recall the AIEO, even recently released, was kind of held back for about a month to make it less stringent on security and guardrails and not reduce risking speed. So I think the read is pretty simple, which is you aren't going to try to block technology you really think you're behind on. And what China's doing now is guarding AI that they think is good enough to protect, and also now creating a little bit of a dependency on Beijing, right? Companies who want to have these are going to have to be doing business and having conversations with China. And that really changes our leverage and engagement across the world, you know, in places like the Gulf, Southeast Asia, Africa, even some parts of Europe, because now there's a real two-supplier trade-off between Chinese models and US models. And so it'll be interesting to see how this plays out.
I heard that export controls are a really great national security tool that everybody should use because they're the new hotness now. We've been talking about this for a while.
They are the new hotness.
Mm-hmm.
Not as cool as tariffs, but...
which are trade taxes.
That's right.
So for dumpster fires, I'm very excited for dumpster fires this week because I feel like for the past year and a half, I have been subject to 20 million different lessons learned from the Biden administration that were basically all, if only we could use OTAs for everything, everything would be better. And what I love about that is like I guarantee that most of the people who said that like don't actually know what OTA stands for, which to be fair, off the top of my head with 3 glasses of beer, I'm not sure I could either. But we're going to talk about OTAs tonight. OTAs are effectively like a procurement authority that lets you get around a number of different requirements of the FAR, DFAR. What is it? Other Transaction Authority?
Yeah, Other Transaction Authority.
Which is a ridiculous name. That's insane. That doesn't make any sense. Other Transaction Authority. Here we are. Other Transaction Authority. We're going to talk about this, whether or not it's a good thing or a bad thing. We're going to talk about how Congress is getting kind of weirded out by like, you guys seem to be like doing this more in this administration, which has been strongly encouraged by the Trump administration. And what are the implications of this? So quick background. So the Pentagon buys a whole lot of things. One of the ways that it buys things skips most of the normal contracting rulebook through OTAs, other transaction authority. Again, stupid name. And it exists, though DOD, and then, of course, others as well. But DOD can move fast and buy from companies that would never survive the regular process. At least that's the theory. This is very good for to be able to have this in concept. We have talked about all kinds of reasons that in past episodes of, like, it's a struggle to get through the procurement system. But now it's grown into an $18 billion a year channel, which kind of seems like maybe that have grown a lot, where it's a big marquee place for AI deals to get done. And unlike normal contracts, OTAs don't have to get posted publicly, which is fascinating. So most of that money doesn't show up at usaspending.gov, and it's hard for people to understand, like, what is actually going on. So interestingly, last month, the Senate passed the Stop Secret Spending Act, what a great name, SSSA, to make OTAs visible like everything else. This wasn't saying, like, don't do it. It was saying, like, hey, you at least need to tell us a little bit what's going on, which is interesting, particularly in light of AI. So I would like to get into how is this actually a good thing or a bad thing? What's going on? And to try to understand, like, what actually is going on here. So I want to start with what is actually broken about defense acquisition. We only have 10 minutes as opposed to 5 hours.
Right.
And what is broken about defense acquisition and federal buying generally? Rada, answer.
I think if I were to shorthand this, it is this. We created a whole acquisition system to buy big things like ships and aircrafts and missiles and exquisite artifacts. And so it's got a lot of diligence. They got to check your, right? Like just like if you were buying a house. And so it has all sorts of checks in it. The timelines are slow, but it's for things that are going to last, decades. And the problem is we tried to use that same way that you buy a house to buy your iPhone. So you don't want to have to go through all the same tests. They're cheaper. You're going to change it out more often. It's not going to last decades. And so trying to shove your iPhone buying process through the home buying process leaves everyone feeling frustrated. The iPhone sellers, the home buyers, the people who want to buy homes who are now distracted by people who want them to buy iPhones, right? Like the whole thing is a mess. And concretely, that happens because there are three things that have to get intersected all together. The budget, which comes through this PPBE process where money gets locked in like years in advance. The contracting process, the selection process, which is how you do competitive selection, and then the contract vehicle to the technology provider, right? Which is like how you literally sign an agreement where you trade tech for money.
Mm-hmm.
And those just don't line up super well in the current system for digital technology, particularly for what people call FAR, which is Federal Acquisition Regulations. So FAR-based contracts are slow and not well set up for this. And so that is where you end up with this air quote valley of death. Side note, there are multiple valleys of death, but that's a whole separate podcast, where basically the theory is good technology dies while it waits for government to buy it because there's no flow of cash. So OTAs are kind of like in this solution space trying to deal with that gap.
Okay, brief aside. I went to Jerusalem one time. I have no idea if this is true or not. I was on a tour. It was in the evening, and this guy was walking around and be like, hey, that area over there that I'm pointing to that we're kind of walking through right now, that's the Valley of Death. So you're walking through the Valley of the Shadow of Death. And you're like, oh, really? And I'm like, I'm just going to accept it. I'm going to accept that I was walking through that at that moment, which is both an acquisition reference as well as a biblical reference, and as well as a
song
by someone.
Dire Straits?
No. I was going to go with Tupac.
Yeah, okay.
This is great. We're so good at this. Okay, so tell me, what is an OTA? Like, separate from like the fact that I found the actual name ridiculous. Tell me what an OTA is.
Okay. So
you just stop right there because I'm so embarrassed. It was Coolio. Did I say Coolio. Tupac?
You did.
God.
But I said Dire Straits, so you should be less embarrassed than me. Honestly, but also, I don't do the pop culture.
Like, I'm not going to edit this out. We should just own the fact that we just did that. Like, Coolio, like that ridiculous movie with Michelle Pfeiffer.
Oh, School One, right?
Yeah, Dangerous Mind. No, that was the name of the album. Anyway, Rada and I were both extremely cool.
So cool.
So aside.
Hence my discussion of the FAR here on our podcast.
Yep.
Right. So anyway, the FAR is basically a giant rule book of all of the things you have to do to get a federal contract. Other transaction is basically a thing that is literally some other way the government can do a transaction other than that big fat rule book. So it lives outside the FAR, it lets you skip the FAR. Essentially, it's a thing that started for NASA in the 1950s. And then DOD got a research version in the 80s. And now you've basically got three flavors. You've got a research version, which lets you like kind of research and do things. You've got a prototype version and you've got a production version. The prototype version is basically the workhorse, especially for digital technology.
Mm-hmm.
And the key here is if you competitively select the prototype and that competitive selection meets your made up criteria, then you can move it to a production agreement and a production OT without any new competition. And that is the secret sauce, right? Because now you can get a production contract only competing on your prototype.
Wow. All right. This is so interesting. This was much better explanation than I've heard in other cases, which is basically like, oh, it lets you just like skip things. Okay.
If listeners want to look at this, the Defense Acquisition University has a contracting cone, which is my source of reference. And I feel that someday I'm just going to make one of those giant poster boards and have it up when I talk, like a member of Congress.
Genuinely, DAU has incredible resources.
Really does.
All right. So there is, like in all things, there's a reason that the usual process takes longer. It has friction. Sometimes friction is good. Good friction can happen in government. You slow down and you try to make decisions slowly and with attention. And there's trade-offs associated with that. So as an example, GAO says that DOD's OTA obligations went from 1.8 billion in 2016 to 18 billion in 2024, which is kind of a lot, 10 times if you didn't do math in your head right there. And that 16 of that 18 is prototype work. Most of it doesn't show up in usaspending.gov, which if you haven't been to before is kind of fucking awesome. So the biggest growth area in defense buying is also extremely invisible. Is that a trade-off that is like not awesome or something we should fix, or how should we think about this?
So just a couple context pieces. The defense budget is almost $1 trillion.
That's a lot of money.
18 billion is only a fraction of that. So even though OTAs are growing, I just want to like put this in context. The huge amount of the procurement dollars there are in a bunch of contracts that are hard to provide oversight on. So I want to separate the transparency, which I'll come back to, with the oversight mechanisms, which are deeply lacking for procurement, whether they're in an OTA or a major program acquisition or like MilCon or anything, right? Like the department spends a huge amount of money and there right now is not the level of oversight of it that there could be. And I think that's just like an opportunity for growth and improvement amongst us all. The second piece is DOD also can't see this. DOD doesn't know and doesn't have a good way, at least last check, to know the extent to which these OTAs were successful, that translated into production awards. So while we all believe OTAs are a really useful source to get to production contracts, there is relatively limited data on how effective it is. The last bit I will just say is OTAs, to my mind, the real concern / problem with them is not just on the back end spend, but the front end selection, which is for big purchases above certain dollars and thresholds, you have all of these independent cost estimates and like assessments that decide how much you should spend on it. Lots of scrutiny groups like POGO will point out that none of that needs to get applied to OTAs. So you don't have ICEs, you don't have the same selection criteria, and that causes a problem. Last piece on the OTAs to say, and then I'm going to come to this transparency piece, is that it seems like a lot of the people getting the OTAs are actually primes who partner with new entrants.
Which is ridiculous.
Right. And so it is just a faster way to get money to the same people who were getting contracts before. And I'll note, in many cases, underperforming in cost, schedule, performance, or all three, which is really a magic trifecta if you think about it, because sometimes they would say pick two. And it turns out you can pick none. And that's an option to continue getting federal dollars. Anyway, to be here, I don't want to pretend that OTAs kind of created this opacity problem.
Yeah.
But what is distinctive is that because you can have really limited competition and because you're looking at prototypes on the front end, which are selected in different ways, there is a unique way in which these can be used and abused to pick your favorites in small dollars that often don't face scrutiny and sort of frog in a boiling pot your way to very large dollars that normally would be subject to at least some of these checks and now cannot be. And I think that is the part that is problematic. So is there an inherent trade-off between like speed and transparency and these rules? Like maybe there's some, but is this at the sweet spot? Almost surely not.
So the other thing about this that listeners may know, but just to be clear about, one of the things that's always fascinating to me about like government procurement is that one, the market research element of government procurement is much more lacking than you would think it would be, depending on what you're talking about. But two, even if there was a lot of market research available in terms of like what should or could this actually cost, in many cases, particularly in Department of Defense, you're buying things there's not like a huge market for. You are trying to figure out it's both what is it we're willing to pay for it and also how much does it actually cost to generate in some ways. So it's a bizarro, to use a technical term, market, while also lacking in some cases in some of the access that you might ever have if you were buying just say a widget of some kind. So last couple of questions here. We had the Senate pass this bill in order to create this greater transparency piece. I want to better understand how bad are things actually getting right now? Are we talking about theoretical risk? Are we talking about things that are actually problematic? Is somebody doing something wrong? Or is this just more of a we've identified something that's kind of strange and we should like at least correct the transparency piece here?
So, I mean, on the one hand, the follow on loophole, as I just mentioned, is like a real thing, right? And the successful prototype to production pipeline means that relatively smaller deals can turn into big deals. And the thing people always point to is the Army Future Combat Systems,
Oh, bless his heart.
which racked up, 150 plus billion dollars on pretty shaky commercial justification. And, that's like the sort of one time you broke curfew that your parents bring up for the rest of your life, right? So
And also, it had really good ads. Do you remember the FCS ads?
I do. I do.
Those were good ads.
It's that real DC moment, like when you remember the various like prime contractor ads that
Or
were
the
of parents.
Pentagon Metro ads that
Yeah.
you see. Yeah.
But I think the kind of current version of this is these AI contracts, which I'll confess kind of as a caveat were started when I was there and then completed after transition, which aren't super transparent and they have ceilings and terms, but the terms of the contracts aren't transparent the way they would be if you did a multi-vendor IDIQ or some other FAR-based contract. And that has obviously been the subject of much external debate and fodder between the department and various AI companies over the last many months.
So here's the thing. As I mentioned at the beginning, there are like kind of beyond the Pentagon universe, people have been talking about OTAs as like, oh my God, this is the solution to everything. Thank God we have OTAs for a while. But we're talking about now like the risks, small R risks that associated with this, but also like some pretty significant oversight risks associated with this. Is there something to do here? Like as we talked at the beginning, the Senate passed the Stopped Secret Spending Act. Does that actually do anything? Are there other things we could think about? What are your views?
So I think it's a perfectly fine start. It's not a crackdown on OTAs. It doesn't stop you doing anything. It just forces some transparency. It shines a light on them. My big hesitation, which is broader than OTAs, is like, who is actually reviewing all of these OTAs? Because if you
Oh my
have
gosh, yes.
transparency with no one looking at the stuff that is transparent, I don't know what that tells us. So kind of where I stand is like, I don't actually have a particular problem with OTs. Like it's not like major program acquisition is going great. So I think they actually helped fix something that's genuinely broken. I think they're particularly useful for fast moving technology and commercial technology in the digital space in particular. We let fast come at the expense of invisible, which was kind of unintentional or unnecessary, and you could fix that. But really my question is, hey, can we get some of that AI to help create a much more dynamic review system? Can we get things like third-party audits or external audits of the system so that you don't have just sunshine, you have someone looking at the area that's been all lit up and seeing if there's anything there? And that, I think, is like where the actual problem slash issue lies. And I don't see a lot of movement on that in the near term.
Just as an aside, this is probably a future episode. This is one of the most fascinating things about our entire transparency and oversight system is that it's not usually aimed at government finding the flaws in itself, but making enough information available that outside groups could find those flaws, tell Congress about them or others about them, and then somebody could act on it, which is just a fascinating way to run a railroad.
Yeah.
This week, various life events intervened, actually a whole lot of them. So there's no warning signs. The warning sign I will offer you is that we'll be back in a couple of weeks with a new episode. But for now, we'll go straight from dumpster fires to Gong Show. So for Gong Show this week, full confession, neither Rada nor I have seen the Odyssey. I, however, have watched probably at least 90 minutes of interview and promo material about the Odyssey. Pretty much everything that Matt Damon has been interviewed about, or Anne Hathaway, or John Leguizamo, or like I don't know why, but this is just like what is being promoted on my Insta right now. So I have watched a lot of that. I've also read the Odyssey, as one does. So we want to talk about the Odyssey before either of us has seen it, which I will see someday. I have so many like initial views and questions, and I would love to hear yours too, because like it's kind of awesome to be able to I have so many thoughts about this movie that I have not yet seen.
I know, me too. Well, first of all, there's the fashion of the premiere, and anything with Tom Holland and Zendaya together in it. It's like I just like heart emojis float out of my eyes,
yes,
because I love them ever so. It's piece one. Piece two is I feel like they're doing a really good job on promotion. Like I don't usually want to see movies, if I'm totally honest.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I can go see this because similarly, they've got the like names of people. They've created like a lot of buzz on it. So I feel like that's looking pretty good. And then, there's like Anne Hathaway is going to play like woman who's like, regal on the inside, but like her true royal spirit hasn't been identified until she undergoes like trials and tribulations and comes out on top in like Odyssey or Princess Bride. Like, Tom Holland is like, faced with loss of his father figure and is like raised by a strong female lead and like takes on responsibilities to like ensure that he can protect the safety of the city around him, like Spider-Man or the Odyssey, et cetera, et cetera. And so I feel like there's a lot of typecasting going on.
So I have also been reading about this interpretation of the Odyssey. And obviously there's the fact that like Odysseus is not wanting to go home and talk to his wife. But then there's also this like sort of betraying the values of your civilization element about it that I'm intrigued by. So I'm going to go deep for a second before I go shallow. My deep version of this is the Trojan horse as deep, incredible threat to destruction of any number of different values that Odysseus and others held dear. And Odysseus spending the next 10 years not in a like I got lost, but in a I cannot go home and tell my wife how bad that was. And I cannot go home and confess this, and I cannot recognize all of this. So I'm going to go off and do these things, which I'm really interested in. I think it's like actually really great IR, veteran, PTSD, like any number of different storytelling things that are not necessarily typically prominent in Odyssey storytelling. Separately, however, every photo of Zendaya where she's sitting there like looking at Matt Damon and just judging him so profoundly. Like I love that so much of like, I have been you, girl. I have been you in that moment. You were just sitting here looking at him like, you moron. And I love that so much.
I really appreciate the facial judgment that you get from Zendaya and Matt Damon. And I think they really well cast the interactions between the different folks. I will say I also, at least in the banter, I'm really interested to see the like mother-son dynamics between Anne Hathaway and Tom Holland, which just feels like a weird pairing. And because Anne Hathaway is my age, I don't think of her as being a mother figure in these types of things. And yet here we are, fending off suitors while having a raised son. If anyone can do it, Anne Hathaway can.
I also appreciate There's a lot of like internet hate of Tom Holland, and I actually really love Tom Holland.
What?
Yes. People are like, he's miscast. I disagree with this profoundly. I think he's a perfect Telemachus. On top of that, I also am super excited to see John Bernthal as Mentor in this movie.
Oh.
No, he's not Mentor. He's Menelaus. Sorry. Whoa. Very different. Not the same. Anyway, I'm so jazzed by this. Like all the whole cast is incredible. And all of the people getting like seasick and weirded out and exhausted and filming this Christopher Nolan film, it all seems lovely. And they're all doing a really lovely job of storytelling around it.
I look forward to the costumes and the spoilers that I read when I watch and then fall asleep during the movie.
Yeah, I'm going to be real with you all. I'm probably not going to see this until it's on my own television. I'm not going to go to it. IMAX. And that's okay. That's okay. Sometimes you can appreciate, it's like television without pity. You can appreciate things from afar.
That's right.
With that, thank you for listening to another episode of Sirens, and we'll see you next time.
Goodbye.